How a homeless man turned his last $40 into Disney. Walt Disney is an American idol, and he strived to bring out the inner child that every person needs through his characters, movies, and theme parks. In this whole process, he built one of the best companies in the world with an estimated worth of $130 billion. But before he was near to achieving his success, he became homeless and only had $40 in his pocket. So how did Disney start? And how did a homeless man turn his last $40 into Disney? In this video, you will learn about how a high school dropout became an American icon by pursuing his passion. So, let's get started. A family curse. In 1901, Walt Disney was born in Chicago, but then they moved to Kansas City. After moving to Kansas City, his father got into a newspaper business and forced him to make deliveries before morning. So while he was just 10 years old, he had to work more and help to renovate the family home. After 7 years in Kansas, the Disney family moved back to Chicago. After World War I entered its fourth year, Walt started working for the Red Cross and was sent to France. When the war ended, Walt returned home and refused to go to high school. His father accepted his decision and offered him a job at the factory for a fair salary, but Walt wanted something else. Escaping from home for his dream. Then, against his father's wishes, Walt packed all of his bags and boarded a train for Kansas City to meet his brother Roy. From his early life, he was sure that he could become a cartoonist, but when he headed to the Kansas City Star's office, an HR employee informed him that there were no openings for a cartoonist. Later, Roy suggested Walt apply to an art studio that was looking for an apprentice. The owners were impressed with his eagerness and offered him a job. Then one day, Kansas City offered Walt the position of an artist, and Walt accepted this crucial offer. Walt's new skills. Later at work, Walt realized animation looked more realistic when using hand-drawn figures instead of cutouts, and the company was so impressed with Walt's new skill that they asked him to produce animations. So Walt borrowed the company's camera, created a makeshift studio in his garage, and started making his own cartoons. After completing it, he showed his cartoons to the manager of the Newman Theater Company, and no doubt the manager was impressed and agreed to feature Walt's cartoons, which were successful. Then Walt quit his job and started a new business called Laugh-O-Gram Films. Soon, he signed a deal with Pictorial Club, but later he realized pictorial clubs went bankrupt. From homeless to Hollywood. After discovering the pictorial clubs was no more, Laugh-O-Gram followed suit. Walt became homeless and even shoeless. For the first time in his life, Walt doubted his career as a cartoonist and decided it was time to give up on being a cartoonist and sold his camera. Afterward, he headed to Hollywood with just $40 in his pocket to stay with his Uncle Robert. His plan was to get into the movie business as a director. But Walt's luck was no different in Hollywood, and every single studio he applied to as a director rejected him. Eventually, Walt ran out of money and had to borrow from Roy, and Roy suggested that he start making cartoons again. New opportunity, come in. Afterward, Walt created a makeshift studio in his Uncle Robert's garage, and then pitched the idea to film distributors. One of his plans was to produce a series of Alice in Wonderland comedies for a New York distributor named Margaret Winkler. Fortunately, she agreed to work with Walt, and Alice's Wonderland was a hit and grew into a longer series. By the time Universal Pictures asked Margaret's husband, Charles, to find someone to create a series starring a rabbit, Margaret encouraged Charles to give Walt the job, and Walt accepted and quickly started production. The final product was called Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, and its first short film, Trolley Troubles, was an instant success and caught the attention of the top animators in New York. Walt was thinking that Charles would renew his contract to grow the Oswald series, but Charles rejected and owned every character he created. First animated cartoon with sound. When Walt returned to his studio, he wasted no time in creating a new character. He started sketching different animals and landed on the idea of a mouse, but he had trouble finding a distributor for his first animated short film, Steamboat Willie, featuring Mickey Mouse. A show business veteran named Harry suggested that Walt play Steamboat Willie in the Broadway theater. Walt was scared that it would make it harder to release to a distributor, but Harry convinced him. Several months later, Steamboat Willie was released at the Colony Theater, and it made history as the first animated cartoon with sound. Just like Harry predicted, several distributors made offers to release the film, but Walt accepted the offer of Pat Powers, who was willing to advance the money Walt needed to make more cartoons. Yet, like most stories made in Hollywood, it was too good to be true. The long route to success. After Walt signed a deal with Pat, Mickey Mouse became a national sensation in the US. But Pat decided to keep all the profits he made off of Mickey Mouse and owed Walt hundreds of thousands of dollars. Still, Walt decided not to pursue legal action because of Pat's influence in Hollywood and ended his contract instead. Pat was bitter that he lost Walt's business and threatened to take down any company that signed a deal with him. MGM gave in to Pat's threats and ended talks of a potential deal. Failure turned out into a blessing. Meanwhile, Columbia Pictures was not as scared and set up a legal fund to fight his threats. With Columbia Pictures backing, Walt discovered it becoming more difficult to meet payroll. But when he asked Columbia Pictures for an advance for each cartoon produced, their answer was no. Then, fortunately, Joseph, co-founder of Charlie Chaplin, reached out to him to become his new distributor. Then, Walt started working on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. 3 years later, Snow White was finally released, and it made history as the first animated feature film in the world, with a running time of 83 minutes. It was a critical and commercial success and became the highest-grossing film of its time, bringing in more than $8 million during its first year. And finally, Walt was able to pay off his debts. Walt's newfound success allowed him to buy a new studio, but it seemed that after every new milestone, bad luck followed. His new feature films Pinocchio and Fantasia were over budget and drove the company on the brink of bankruptcy. After the financial losses, many of his employees remained bitter and went on strike for 5 weeks. From feature film to amusement park. In spite of all that, Walt's mind was set on building an amusement park, a new Hollywood attraction. By the time Walt settled on the name Disneyland, his plans had grown beyond his initial inspiration, and money was running out. So Walt decided to launch a weekly TV show to finance the park's construction. Walt signed a deal with ABC. They agreed to invest in his amusement park and guaranteed loans in exchange for a TV series with hour-long episodes called Disneyland. 2 years later, Disneyland finally opened in California, and the media called its first day a failure. Thousands of scammers created counterfeit tickets, rides broke down, restaurants ran out of food, and a gas leak was detected in one area. But like always, Walt believed in himself, and by making operational changes and inviting the press to return, within 1 year, over 3 million people visited Disneyland, and the ABC series became the highest-rated TV show. Today, Disneyland is called the happiest place on Earth, and Walt Disney is one of the most successful and powerful companies in the world, worth an estimated $130 billion. This is the story of how a high school dropout became an American icon by pursuing his passion. What's your opinion about his success story? Please let us know in the comment box. For more inspiring stories, don't forget to subscribe to our channel.